Okay, now we'll pick up where we left off. We need to add something to this Lambda function right here. This is the one that signs up a user, and when we used it last time, it created a user in the user pool that was unconfirmed. The next step to take is to follow up on this sign-up event and confirm the user. One method to do this is to somehow check a mailbox or something and get a code and use that code to confirm the user. The confirm sign-up method of the Cognito Identity Provider client requires that. But we have another option, which is to do the admin confirm sign-up, and this is like an administrator going in and doing the confirmation. This is the step we took manually, but we can do this programmatically immediately following the user sign-up. This might require adding some permissions to the Lambda function to cause this to work, but let's go ahead and start making the change. So here the user gets signed up, we get the user sub in response, and we print that the user was signed up, and then we return. But this right here is where we'll do the confirmation. At this point, we have the username still, we have the client ID still, and we just need to confirm that user that was just created. So we'll call this the confirm response, Cognito IDP client, and the method we're going to use is admin confirm signup. First argument is the client ID. That is the same one we used to do the signup. We need the username, which is of course the same one that we used to sign up. I believe that's all we need. And it looks like we get an empty dictionary in response. So as long as there's no error, we can proceed with returning success as true, just like last time. If there's an exception here, the string should make it clear that what failed was the confirmation. So if there's an error here, the user won't have been created at all. If there's an error here, the user will have been created but not confirmed. Okay, this is complete, so let's go into the Amazon console and look at the Lambda function itself and verify that the code is changed, and then run another test event. We will configure this test event to sign up user2 with a new password, and let's see what results we get. Oh, we changed how we have to configure this test event. We have to have a key called body, and then that is a string of JSON. We need to do user2. User1 already exists, so that will fail either way. I think this might work. No. I'm not sure how best to test an event like this when it has to be in a string, because that's how it works with the Lambda URL. When we use a public URL, it submits this JSON string, but that doesn't make it easy to test. Okay, missing required input parameter, user pool ID. Client ID must be one of user pool ID. Oh, let me check this again. Okay, we don't need the client ID, we need the user pool ID. So that's going to have to get passed in through the environment. So let's get that out of the environment. User pool ID. Now we also need to pass that in the stack. Before we were only passing in client ID, we also need to pass in that user pool ID. I'll copy this line here because we do have to pass it into the login function already. And we'll deploy again. The update is complete. I'm going to refresh this and look for the changes in the code. We're now taking the user pool ID from the environment. That's getting passed to the confirm signup function. And if I look at configuration, we also see the user pool ID is being provided to the Lambda function. So now there's an error because the user already exists. If we recall from last time, the event took place because it had the wrong argument being passed to, or wrong parameter being passed to admin confirm signup. As a result, this had actually succeeded. So there is in the user pool a user called user002 that was unable to be confirmed. I'll have to go back and confirm that one manually. Let's now try this process with a user 3. I'll just keep the passwords consistent for now. I'll be deleting all these users later. Okay. Error when calling the admin confirm signup operation. The service role belonging to the Lambda is not authorized to perform admin confirm signup. So these are specific IAM things. We'll need to, like I thought might be the case, specifically add some permissions to the role that this Lambda is running as. That will be done somewhere in here. I'm going to have to add a line here, I believe. I'll have to add permissions to call admin confirm signup to role. So I should be able to access this IAM role as signup lambda.fn.role or something to that effect. Here's the documentation for the CDK construct for a Lambda function. If I go to our custom construct for public Lambda, that is going to be the read-only property fn on the public Lambda construct. Once created, we have the following properties. The one we're looking for is role. The role will be the execution role, and that's what we need to add the permissions to. That should be an instance of role. Let's start typing that. Signup lambda.fn.role. Instead of adding something to the role, let's check if we can do it the other way. I've done it the other way before. We would go into this user pool, find the permission that needs to be made. We'll go to the user pool and see if we have the ability to grant a role permission to operate on it. So let's check the documentation for the user pool. Grant. The grant function often lets me do what I'm trying to do. I need to grant to a role, which a role is should satisfy the interface iGrantable. It does. And then actions are a list of strings. So let's try to do it this way. The user pool is actually part of the construct called user pool. So it's userpool.userpool.grant. I don't know why that keeps auto-completing. The first argument to this grant function is the role, and that role is signup lambda.fn.role. That's the execution role. And then the actions are admin confirm signup. If there is no role, I can't add anything to it. What if I do this? Okay, that works. I thought I had to give it a list of strings. Oh, it's a okay, it's var args. Okay, this should work to just grant the role, provided that the role exists. It will grant it with the admin confirm signup action against the user pool. That's what we want to do. I don't think role should be undefined or anything. I want to go back to the lambda now and make sure it will have a role. It's optional. The default is a unique role will be generated per this lambda function, so this shouldn't be undefined or anything. This should be that generated role. Let's run this and then look at the role and try to find evidence that this permission was added to it after CDK deploy. Okay, I got the error that admin confirm signup is invalid. An action string consists of a service namespace, a colon, and the name of the action. So we'll look at this more carefully. This is the string that I need. Cognito-IDP colon admin confirm signup. I'm going to try to run this again. The CDK process is interrupted to ask for my confirmation of security related changes, and that's comforting since we're expecting to be making a change to an IAM role. And it's specifically the service role for the signup lambda function. That process is complete, so we're going to look at this lambda function and find its role. And we see that the Cognito IDP admin confirm signup action was granted against this resource of our user pool, and it's allowed to do it. So I want to run this test again, although once again user 3 was successfully created if I'm interpreting the error correctly. So we'll try and create and confirm user 4. Now I see a success. So what I'm hoping is that when we move over here to the user pool under Cognito, we will see 4 users. User 1 was manually confirmed. User 2 and user 3 should have been created, but there was a failure in confirming them, and user 4 should be created and confirmed. And that's what we see. We haven't actually verified the email address because we are bypassing any process of receiving an email with a token and clicking on a link or anything like that. But user 1 and user 4 are both confirmed, so we should be able to log in as user 4 from our Python client. Let's test that. We've successfully done this as user 1 before. And now we're successfully doing it as user 4. Okay, it's time to change this main file a little bit and translate it into a menu. So I'm going to comment out most of this. And we'll bring it back later. We want, when the user first runs this file, to show a menu. Okay, let's make a main menu here. When the program first starts, the main menu will ask a user to either sign up or log in. So I think the first, we'll go back and represent this as a class, but for now we need 3 elements for each option. A number or a character that the user can type to select it, the display name of the action, and later we'll put a function here that will actually do the registration. We're on the register page. Or you are on the login page. And I'll call this the auth menu. Now we need a function that will take this and display the options to the user and ask them to select from them. Okay, let's display the menu. We'll take a menu as an argument and do the following. We'll iterate over this, and then each option within the menu is going to be a list of 3 items. First item being the key. The second item being the display name. And the third item being display text, but we'll replace this with a function. We'll store these things in a dictionary. And print these actions. Just to test how this is working, let's run this as is. Okay, good. Now what we want to do is actually print each of these options and then prompt the user to select. So we'll start by doing this with the format string. We'll print the select key. And then maybe a dash, and then the display name. Okay, that works. Let's change this argument to menu options and also take a menu title. The menu title will be the auth menu. Print the menu title at the top, and then print an empty line. Good. After displaying all the options, we want another empty line, and then we'll have to take user input. we can make this an argument as well. Input prompt, and its default can be select an option. Okay. Let's change these numbers to 1 and 2. And when we store this in the dictionary, let's store this as a string so we can compare whatever the user typed to what's in this actions dictionary. So if the user input is in the dictionary, we will print the display text for now. Otherwise, we'll print that a valid option wasn't selected. Okay, so if I select 1, I'm on the register page. If I select 2, I'm on the login page. If I type something else, I'm told I need to make a valid selection. Now, instead of printing texts, let's make functions that will be called when the user selects either register or login, and we'll use this prototype to make other menus as well. So I'll make a function called register action that will now print you are taking the register action. And a login action. And now, instead of putting these strings as the third argument, or the third item in the list, we'll give a function. So now down here in the display menu, instead of calling the third item display text, we'll call it the action function. We'll store that, and now instead of printing what's here, we'll call that function. This should have similar behavior to before, except slightly different strings. You are taking the register sign up action. You're taking the login action. We can implement the login function by just copying all of this and putting it into the login action function. We want to bring in the login lambda URL at the top. All of this will be broken apart into different files and modules later. And now the login thing should work. If I press 1, I'm taking the register action. If I press 2, we go right into that function. And I can log in as any of the users we've created so far. Now, before we didn't implement registration because users wouldn't automatically be confirmed. But now that we've fixed that, we can solve this problem. So we can write a similar method to the login action to actually allow a self-sign-up. The sign-up lambda URL can be grabbed from the environment. And now we can do almost the same thing we're doing down here. Please sign up. Prompt for username and password. And send the username and password to the correct Lambda function. And then we'll just print the response. So now let's register. We've already registered users 1 through 4. Let's try to log in or try to register as an already existing user. And we're getting the error that the user already exists. So let's try this with a new one. Okay, now I'm getting a success message. I'm just going to check the user pool and make sure that that user was created and confirmed, which it is. We can use part of the standard library called getPass to get the password from the user instead of what we've been doing. So instead of using this, we can call this method, and this will actually make that same prompt. We could, if we weren't happy with the prompt, we could put a new prompt in here. But let's try this. Okay, the login was successful, and you'll note that this getPass method takes the input, but it doesn't display it back. So we'll also do this for the register password input. Now we want to have a main menu. Once the user is registered and logged in, there should be a landing page that they go to. Now, after a user successfully registers, they should go back to the login page. Once they successfully log in, they should go to a new place, and this is where we'll put the majority of the application. We'll make a class called a menu option. The properties that it's going to need to take are going to be its label and its action function. And there may be other ones as well. We'll allow the action function to be null. If it is, then we'll supply our own. It'll be a default one. We'll create a function to be called whenever this menu option is selected, called action. And that will just call the passed-in function, giving it these arbitrary keyword arguments and arguments. This class will take instances of menu option, one for each item in the user menu. We'll take a name for the menu. And then a method to add an option one at a time. Next, this class has to have a method to display each option in turn and then take input for the user selection. This also needs to maintain a map. In addition to maintaining a list of options, it has to maintain a map of input keys to options. We'll use the index, or the length of the list as the input key. So the first option will be 1, second option 2, etc. When it's time to display, first thing is to display the name, and then each item in turn, after an empty line. The option itself also needs to track what its input key is, so we'll add a method to set that. So the input key will be the length of the list at this point as a string. This is the input that takes a 1 for the first option, 2 for the second option. Now when we're iterating through each one, print the input key and then the label. Then at the end we'll print, and then that suffices for the display, but the next step is to actually take the user input. And we want the input prompt to also be something that can be set at the class. And it will default to whatever we used before. Select an option. Now we'll make another method, display menu, and take input. Actually, I think you can all go inside the display menu. User input will be input with the given input prompt. And then that user input, if the user selected one of the actual options, it will be something that's in the menu option map. The chosen option will then be located in that dictionary with that key. And then for now, we'll just call the action method on that. Otherwise, we'll print invalid selection. And we'll go back and iterate on this and make this a loop so that the prompt continues until a valid option is selected. Now I want to import all of these classes into the main file and implement what's going on using these classes. So instead of this, import some things at the top. I think to get this working, everything has to be nested one level down. So in the new folder, the menu there. Init main there. Now let me try and call it from here. Okay, I just had to move the main file outside of this. So within the project there's main, inside of snowfall is an init, inside of menu is an init, and that's where everything is defined. There's a syntax error in this though. Oh, this is a function. Okay, so the import statement worked. Now for the register option, that will be a menu option with the name of register. And the action function will be register action. And then same thing for login. Now we need to create a menu and add both of those options to the menu. We'll add the options, and they have to be added in the order that they'll be listed in. So that register will be 1 and login will be 2 in this case. Now this should behave the same way it did before, except now we're leveraging these classes. menu name, the input key is on each menu option. Where it's called key. Okay, so now pressing 2 was expecting that to call the login function, but it did not. Let me try putting in 3. So the invalid selection is working, this part is not. Oh, we have to actually call the function. Okay, now it's asking us to log in. And it works the same as before. So now we have an abstract menu. We can build more than one menu besides just the authentication one. Okay, now it's time to make a class, a singleton class for everything related to authentication. And that's where we'll actually store the credentials and authenticated SDKs to Amazon services. Auth module. And we'll place it here. Okay, in this file, we'll make a singleton class. The way to make a singleton is to override this new method. We're going to check if this instance is created, and if not, we'll create it. If it has been created, we'll return it, and that will be the new method for this class. So that makes sure that there will always only be one instance of it, no matter where it's imported. Now, within the class itself, we have to store Boolean as to whether or not this client is authenticated. And by default, that will be false, although we will set that to true in the login method from the other file. If a user is authenticated, we'll also want to store those creds in an object, but when there's not an authenticated user, that will be set to null. We should create a method to set the credentials. We'll use the word credentials here. So this method is called isAuthenticated is set to true, and we'll store the past credentials in the singleton. That will be it for this class for now. We'll import that here. Oops, we also have to expose it in the init method. And then in registering, we don't want to authenticate after that. We want to authenticate only after the login action. Let's run this program again so I can remember what the text of the response looks like. We will log in as user 1. Okay. I think this is the method we need. Okay, that looks correct. So now we'll call the auth service and call that authenticate with credentials method. And the credentials we need are the credentials key within this dictionary. A few things to change about this class. I'm going to hide all of these properties so that I can give it methods with these names. So a method I want to create now is authenticated, and that will return a Boolean. Now we're going to add something here. While the auth service methods is authenticated method returns false, we'll do this menu over and over again. So they can register and then they'll go back to this menu and they can log in. If they don't log in correctly, they go back to this menu. Hopefully this means that after they've successfully logged in, that's the only way to exit this while loop. And so now we'll print, you have successfully logged in. So then here is where we can place anything that should only happen with a logged in user. Okay, we actually need to return the class instance either way. So sometimes this is returning none. Try this again. That's not how that was supposed to work. It's thinking I'm logged in anyways. Let's fix this. Oh, I need to put a not here. So we want this loop to be true while the user is not authenticated. So, or maybe to make this more obvious, while auth service is authenticated is false. So now we get the register menu. I could register user 6. And then back to this auth menu. I have to actually log in. I'll log in as user 6. Okay, in a loop no matter what. I'm going to call this constructor once at the beginning of this file and then not call the constructor over and over again. I might be misunderstanding how that singleton is working. Let me see if it works now, because I'm not constructing it both times. I'll go ahead and log in. Now that I've successfully logged in, I see this method and everything's working correctly. Now we'll place more options here that are only available to logged in users. We want to present another menu here. I'm thinking that we might have more than one application within this project. I'm thinking of having a landing page where once the user's logged in, it presents them with several options of an app. In this case, one of the options should be some sort of text RPG, since that's what we want to build, but we could have maybe a couple different options. So we'll list some fake options in a menu. For now, we'll define it here. So here we're going to start creating I like to start by putting some comments of what I'm going to do so I don't lose track of anything. The first thing we need to do is define menu options for each one. Another thing we'll need to do is decide where we're getting the source of what applications are available. Eventually it's going to be a JSON configuration file that's in S3 that the authenticated user has a right to read. But for now, maybe we'll develop a static list, such as we'll list the options, and one will be called text quest. Another will be called text civ, and another will be called text tcg, something to that effect. And then we will make menu options for each of those, functions for each of those, and then a menu. So for each, we'll make the menu option. But before we make the menu option, we'll need a function that we can pass into the menu option. So we'll have the action function. And after that's done, we'll make the menu object and display the menu. So first, let's build a dictionary that will represent what we will later get from S3, and we will call this main menu config. We'll have a title, select application, on a list called apps, and then we'll leave room for other properties, but for now they'll just have a name, text quest, text civ, and text tcg. Let's add one more property to each of them. Active, perhaps like a Boolean value as far as whether one's actually ready. We'll say this one's active, and the other two are not yet active. Now, where's my error? Oh, that's delay. Okay. Now, for app in main menu config apps, and here's where we would use some logic to reach out to S3 with the authenticated credentials and grab a JSON file out of an S3 bucket that represents all of our configuration, then casts it to this object anyway. We'll need to create a function. Okay. If the app is active, we'll display a message. You are playing. Let's use, okay, you're playing app name. And otherwise, we'll print this application is not yet ready. That should work. Now we're going to need a list of menu options to add inside this for loop. So we'll have main menu options. And in here, we will append to this list a new menu option, We pass it a name and an action function. App name, and then the action function will be f, this function right here. And that accounts for all of this. Then we need the actual menu object. The main menu will be a menu, and all we have to pass that is we could actually get that from the config object as well. Now, instead of printing "you've successfully logged in," let's just use display menu. Running this program, we get our authentication menu. We still are using the same user pool, so we have several options to log in. Let's log in as user 1. That was successful, but we forgot a step, so there's no actual options here. The step we forgot was to add the menu options to the menu, which means instead of actually doing this, I'll move the main menu definition to before the for loop, or move this, and then instead of appending this menu option to a list, we will add it using the method we defined earlier to the menu class. So now the main menu is created, then we iterate through each of the objects in this configuration, create a function, and create a menu option. Now, I'm hoping the application works as expected. Later we'll work on something to persist the login so a person wouldn't have to log in every time. Okay, now we see our options. One thing I forgot is I wanted to label coming soon on options 2 and 3, but I'll do that here shortly. When we go into text quest, it says this application is not yet ready. Let me try the same thing with option 2. So logging in again. Okay, the context here is not working the way I was expecting it to, so I have to refactor a bit. I'm going to try putting this function inside a function and returning it. I'm going to make the function, define this function with this context of app, and then return that function. And then here, instead of passing in that function, we will make the function passing in app. And I believe that will accomplish what I'm trying to do. So in this context, app will remain the app in each for loop. What was happening is that this keyword, or the variable app, was by the end of the for loop in all the functions referring to the last item in the list. I'm going to try it this way, logging in again as user 1. And if I hit text quest, I'm playing text quest. Now if I log in again, and select option 2, the application is not yet ready. One more step I want to do with the menu option. The menu item name should be the name of the application. But if the app is not ready, then we want to add something to the end of the menu item name, being the words coming soon. We also need to make sure that that menu item name is what's getting passed into the menu option. Okay, here. Oh, the word is active, not ready. Okay, now it shows coming soon onto the options, and if we select one of the ones coming soon, the application is not ready. The next thing to do is to make the step of placing a JSON file with this configuration into an S3 bucket, and that S3 bucket will be the first thing that we grant permissions for the authenticated role to read from. So once a user logs in, they get those credentials. Those credentials will have certain permissions. Right now they have no permissions. We'll make a bucket and give that role permissions to read from that bucket, and then upload a file to the bucket, and that will be how we control configuration. I don't think we'll need anything other than a bucket as far as CDK resources, but I think we'll still make a construct anyway in case we need to configure this. This won't be a public bucket because non-authenticated users, it's not open to the whole world like our Lambda functions are. However, it's not closed where it has to go through some Lambda function that has a special role. Any logged in client can read from it. So in some sense, it's a public bucket. I think for the purposes of our application, non-logged in users will have no rights other than to log in. So I think we'll still call this a public bucket. That's the name that's coming to mind. So we'll make a new construct, kind of using this public lambda as a guide. I know we need to import these things. We also need to bring in S3. And we need to export a class, a public bucket, which extends construct. It's going to have a read-only property called bucket, which will be an instance of s3.bucket. We need a constructor. The constructor takes a context, the construct, if I'm not mistaken. It's like a scope, an ID, which is a string, and we'll take in props. We must call the super constructor with at least scope and ID. And here we can create our resources. Okay, the thing we want to create is a bucket, and so we will create something like this. This dot buckets will be a new S3 bucket. The context is this. The name will be bucket within this construct, and we'll take in some props. The props we need, the options we have, access control. We don't need to put anything there. We will separately give permissions to the role to read from this bucket in the second step. No auto deletion of objects. Let's go here where it tells us the defaults. New buckets and objects don't allow public access. Okay. Bucket key enabled. Bucket name, we're going to again let CDK name the bucket. Recommended. CORS, we don't need CORS because we're not making a React app right now. If we go and make the React step, we'll need to make sure that CORS is enabled so that a browser can read from this bucket. Every default here I think is actually fine. I don't think we need to make any changes. No public read access. I think every single option is optional. So let's just create a default bucket for now. We can change the configuration later. We don't need to pass in any props. So outside of this construct, when we create it, we'll be able to get the bucket object and add it to the role. But for now, let's just get the bucket created in this stack. So up here, we're importing public lambda and user pool. Bucket comes before lambda in the alphabet, so we'll put this up here. But it's sort of later in our stack, so to speak, so I think I'll put it at the end. We'll call this bucket the public config bucket. This is configuration that the users, well, all users will be allowed to see. So I'll call it the public config bucket. Context is this. Public config bucket. We don't need to pass any props. We have to pass in an empty object so that we can take props later if we need to. Oh, actually we don't. Instead, what I'll do, I'm forgetting how I can take, I think that's what I need to do. Okay, so the default will be an empty object. So I don't need to pass it. Now, public config bucket is here. And an option that I can do to it, I believe grant is the method we need to look for. Grant read. So we're going to give read access to this bucket. To an identity, which is a grantable, and a role is grantable. Now we can get the role from the user pool. The user pool is called user pool. Actually, it's from the identity pool. The identity pool is where a login user gets an identity. That identity should have authenticated role. Grant read is within, so public config bucket is the overall construct. Inside that construct is a bucket, and that has grant read. So now if we deploy, a bucket should get created. Actually we have done the role thing. So we'll want to check that out once we see it in S3 in the console. Okay, the bucket got created, and here it is. If I click on permissions, I should be able to see some evidence that a specific role was given permission to read. Actually, that might not be available here. Let's go look at the IAM role. Okay, here is the authenticated role, and if we look at its permissions, it has a right to read and list objects inside that specific bucket. That is the only permission that the authenticated role has. So with this permission, our Python client application should be able to just go and get objects from this bucket. However, at the moment there are no objects in this bucket. The solution to that problem is called a deployment. I'm currently trying to decide where to put that deployment. That could be inside the public bucket, and we would pass a path to it, but then we've changed the construct name. It's not just any public bucket. We will add a deployment below this public bucket that will write files. When the construct runs, it will write files to that bucket. Oops. I do think it's okay to add deployments to this top level. A deployment is a CDK construct that will let us reference files that are local under the source control of this repository and upload them to S3 at a certain prefix. I believe we can have several deployments per a single bucket. Let's actually check that here. It's not under S3, it's under something called S3 deployment. And what we're looking for is a bucket deployment. Its options are a destination bucket and sources, and a destination key prefix, so we can have several different of these deployment objects. So we have the main configuration as one, configurations for a specific application as another, and all of the material that should be made available to any logged in user that's configuration based should be placed in this bucket as a deployment. Right now we just want one JSON file. Now there are a couple different ways of doing a source. Asset bucket data JSON data. The one we're going to want is JSON data. We will put this here. Deploy JSON files to public config bucket. And we're going to need to bring in the S3 deploy, S3 deployment. We'll call this the main config deployment. It will be a bucket deployment object. The context is this. I don't know why I switched to this mode of naming variables, but this part's in TypeScript. First argument is sources, and the source will be called deployment. JSON data. First argument is the key. We will call this the main menu config. JSON. And we can just pass in a dictionary or a object here that will be written to a JSON file in the S3 bucket when we run deploy. So let's actually look at this. Title and apps. Application menu. And we'll only have one app for now. The name of text quest. and we'll have it, it's not active for now. This object will be made into that JSON file and added, and we could add other source files here in this array as necessary. Why is this? We haven't gotten to that yet. Next thing we have to specify is a destination bucket. That is this public config bucket. We want the bucket within that construct. Let's deploy, and then we should see that file appear here. The deployment is done. Let's check the bucket. And now main menu config has been created here. I'm sure this is the right size. We will try to read it from the Python client next. Now that the configuration object exists in S3, the remaining step is to try to read from it. Already right here we've given the authenticated IAM role read access to any file in that bucket. So all we need to do is use Boto3, which is the library for interacting with AWS services, within the Python application and read that file, which is called main menu config.json in the root of the bucket. Here is where we're statically defining a compatible object. So instead of this section of code, the next step is to read it from S3. Import the Boto3 library and pull up the documentation for it. First, instantiate an S3 client. Before we do this, just like we did for the signup and login Lambda URLs, there has to be one of these to export the name of the bucket, because we'll need that for the code that's about to be written here. This will be the public config bucket. Now a CDK deploy will display the bucket name alongside the signup and login Lambda URLs. The output is actually a construct as well, so it can't share the same name as the other one. So I'm going to change this to say public config bucket name, because that's what it is, and try again. Okay, now alongside these other two attributes is the bucket name, which is this long value here. That should also go in the env file alongside the other values. That's the config bucket name, and that needs to be referenced in here as well. It will be automatically read by this function here. Or rather, that entire file will get read into the environment by this function here. Okay, this is the method we need, which is client.getObject, passing in the bucket, passing in the key, and then we'll get an object from which we can read the file. The name of the bucket is that value from the environment. And the key will hard code as main menu config.json. The response is a dictionary, and it will have body, which is a readable string, and that should be castable to a dictionary. If we import the JSON library, I'm going to comment out this main menu config and replace it with json.loads response body read. I believe this is what is needed. Add the Boto3 library to our dependencies. Okay, we'll log in again as user 1. And we're presented with the menu, which is no longer hard-coded in the file, but read from this S3 bucket. You'll notice that the other options we had hard-coded are taken away, and this is being read from S3, and that's only possible because we gave the authenticated role permissions to read from the bucket. So the next step for the future time is to start planning how we're going to use DynamoDB, which is a serverless database that's different from SQL databases that I've used in other contexts. It's going to take some planning of the data model before we can start using it. And we'll use this to store all sorts of information about the user. And some of the tables will be directly readable by the authenticated user role.